At 7:10 a.m., on June 6, 1944, the air over Omaha Beach, easy red sector, didn't smell of ocean breeze or sea salt. It smelled of nitroglycerin and burned diesel, laced with the metallic sting of fresh blood. Communications Sergeant Thomas Mac McCarthy, 22, born and raised in Boston, was crouched behind a makeshift barricade of twisted German steel beams. He was just 15 meters from the freezing surf, and the shoreline was a slaughterhouse. The first infantry waves had landed 40 minutes earlier and been decimated. Casualties in Easy, Red at that exact moment already exceeded 40% among the Marines and soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division. Mac wasn't holding his M1 Garand rifle. He was holding what remained of a tactical -300 Seychelles rupees radio, recently hit by shrapnel from an 81mm mortar round. The metal casing was warped, and the internal wiring, the radio's neural spine, had been severed in 4 places, while German MG-42 machine guns, nicknamed Hitler's buzz saw, churned the sand around him into red mist and burning debris. Mac had maybe 30 seconds of relative cover to decide. The signals manual clearly stated, abandon disabled gear and try to link with the nearest radio operator. But the next operator, Corporal Jenkins, was 10 meters away, dead, his gear silenced forever. The signal Mac needed to restore wasn't just tactical. It was the lifeline of the invasion. He needed immediate contact with the Naval Fire Command ship, a USS Texas, located approximately 10,000 yards offshore. Without naval gunfire coordination, the Sherman tanks just starting to land would have no cover against German machine gun nests, positioned on the 300-meter bluff overlooking the beach. If the radio didn't work, the infantry would be charging blind into an intact and furious defense. The story of Thomas Mac McCarthy and the few men of the 5th Communications Engineering Detachment, informally called the Wire Rats, didn't he begin with medals or marching bands. It began in the surplus storage depots at Cornwall Base, England, 9 months earlier. Mac wasn't an elite fighter, he was a troublemaker. Before being drafted, he was a self-taught electronics prodigy. In Boston, he repaired neighborhood radios, refrigerators, and even tinkered with an experimental television set. His problem? He didn't respect boundaries. He had been caught as a teen making illegal mods to amplifiers and frequency bands, violating federal regulations just to see what would happen. The U.S. Army saw that tendency to ignore manuals and tamper with wiring as a character flaw, a threat to discipline. But the 5th Detachment's commander, Major Samuel Davies, a retired mechanical engineer with a healthy respect for controlled anarchy, saw it as their only edge. Davies assembled a platoon of 20 men with equally sketchy backgrounds: race car mechanics using junk parts, electricians who ignored safety codes, and radiomen previously punished for pushing their signal range beyond safe limits. Davies' policy was simple: the enemy follows the manual. We don't. You're survival engineers. If the manual says it's dead, you fix it with spit, tape, and stubbornness. They trained for months assuming that 90% of their gear would be destroyed before they hit the beach. Mac, the wiring prodigy, had developed a field surgery system for radios. He could identify a wire's function by the smell on its insulation. He once rewired a transmitter using chewed rubber from a helmet strap. Now, on that brutal morning in Easy Red, all that theory collided with reality. The earth shook under the constant fire of German heavy artillery, dug into the 250-foot cliffs. The -300 Seychelles rupees was dead, and the fate of thousands of landing troops depended on whether Mac could violate every electrical standard in 30 seconds. He stripped off his left glove, revealing a pair of precision pliers he had stolen from a London lab. The sand around him was soaked in salt water and blood. A 20mm shell hit the steel beam in front of him, sending molten metal fragments that forced him down. As he looked at the broken radio, he saw what the mortar round had done: severed the ground wire and the main filter capacitor. The manual said the radio was irrecoverable, but Davies hadn't taught him to follow the manual. Mac had a small coil of copper wire scavenged from a captured telephone cable. He noticed an anomaly in the radio's casing. An emergency grounding screw, illegally installed by him during an inspection 3 weeks earlier, was still intact. The decision was brutal. He could try to isolate and reconnect the capacitor under fire, a procedure that would take at least 2 minutes, a lifetime on Omaha, or he could use the stolen wire to bypass the capacitor circuit entirely, ignoring noise filtering and using the emergency ground. The radio might function for a few seconds, just long enough to send a critical message, but it would fry the transmitter. Mac knew the radio would die, but if it worked for even 10 seconds, that would be enough. The cost of a radio didn't matter. The cost of tactical failure was 1,000 dead men. At 7:11 a.m., Mac jammed the tip of the copper wire into the emergency ground screw, feeling fine sand enter his open wounds. He was about to break every rule in military electronics to try and save the day. At 7:11 a.m., Sergeant McCarthy jammed the tip of the salvaged copper wire into the emergency ground screw, connecting it directly to a rusted terminal on the -300 Seychelles rupees radio's body. It was an act of pure electronic heresy. By bypassing the filter capacitor, Mac was essentially inviting all the electromagnetic interference on the battlefield. The noise of LCT diesel engines, explosion-generated static, and shorts from nearby equipment straight into the transmission line. The radio should have fried instantly, but for a few miraculous seconds, the hack worked. The transmitter as main vacuum tube lit up with an unusually bright blue glow, a spectral hue Mac had never seen in a healthy unit. The radio gave off a high-pitched, electrically charged whine. USS Texas, USS Texas. This is Dog Red 1. Mission code Wire Rat. We're getting wiped out here. Need fire coordination now. Mac yelled into the handset, trying to speak over the chaos. The response was static-filled, a garbled whisper laced with spikes of white noise. Dog Red 1, repeat. Repeat. Massive interference. Cannot confirm your position. The voice, presumably from an operator aboard the Texas, was sharp with panic. At that same instant, less than 50 meters to Mac's right, the Germans were dialing in. Mac's time window was closing. He had to send not just the call for help, but exact grid coordinates for naval surface fire support and SFS. Miss the shot, and the MG nests above the beach would shred the next wave of landing troops. He grabbed his soaked, torn notepad, his tactical map, hand-marked hours earlier. The primary target, MG-42 nests carved into the bluff face, roughly 300 meters up, near a reference called the Fisherman's House. Irrelevant, but visible. Texas. This is Dog Red 1. Easy red sector. Primary target, Bunker Crest N3. Estimated 300 meters out. 250 feet elevation. Grid 11 to 44A. Repeat, 11 to 44A. Immediate suppression or we're done. I have less than 10 seconds. Mac's voice shredded his throat. His eyes were locked on the radio dial, which was now venting a thin, acidic smoke, the copper insulation literally burning under the current. Suddenly, the receiver crackled, slightly clearer. The Texas was boosting its signal. Dog Red 1, copy 11 to 44A. N3, suppression fire in 5 minutes. Confirm Dog Red 1. 5 minutes, an eternity. But confirmation. U.S. Navy artillery had heard him. The 14-inch guns were preparing to fire. Confirmed. 5 minutes. This is... Right gun, the -300 Seychelles rupees snapped. A sound like a muffled pistol shot. The vacuum tube went dark. The smoke thickened. The radio, their only lifeline, was officially dead. 7:13 a.m. Mac dropped the handset into the gray sand. He'd gotten the message through, but at the cost of the entire unit. Now, he had to survive 5 minutes and pray the USS Texas had understood him clearly enough to rain steel where it mattered. The beach was in full collapse. Scattered Marines huddled behind twisted obstacles. They were frozen, not from fear, but from the sense that death was inbound from above. Mac crawled along the barricade, eyes locked on Crest and 300 meters away. German troops were moving ammo crates openly. They felt untouchable. Mac's survival hack had bought 5 minutes of hope. Now, he had to survive them. The countdown to survival had begun. 7:13 a.m. Sergeant McCarthy, now a forced spectator, pulled his M1 Garand into position. He crouched beside Captain Miller, an officer from the 116th Infantry Regiment. Miller had taken a serious leg wound, but still held composure. "Did you reach them, Sergeant? Did the Texas hear you?" Miller asked, tense but steady. "Yes, sir. Grid 11 to 44A. They promised fire in 5 minutes." "That puts us at 7:18 latest," Mac replied, watching combat engineers try to clear Cointet obstacles under relentless fire. They were getting cut down. Captain Miller looked at his cracked military chronograph. "So we've got 4.5 minutes before that MG nest up front finishes the job. Sergeant, if the fire comes, it has to be precise. If it lands short, we're the ones getting Texas." The risk was brutal. Naval fire spotting was more art than science, especially without Mac's ability to correct fire after the first salvo. His -300 Seychelles rupees was dead. Major Davies, the mentor of the wire rats, had always said, "If you can't adjust fire, it's luck over logic. And in war, luck belongs to someone else." Mac grabbed a trench shovel and started digging frantically behind a steel beam. He needed something to do. The paralysis on the beach was heavy. Men weren't waiting for orders. They were waiting for a miracle. 7:15 a.m., 3 minutes left. The MG-42 kept its rhythm, a cloth-ripping sound soaked in armor-piercing death. Mac watched a 29th Division soldier try to sprint from behind a wrecked tank to a bomb crater. He didn't make it, dropped 3 meters short. Mac shut his eyes briefly. The smell of ozone and hot metal from his dead -300 Seychelles rupees lingered. He'd bypassed the noise filter. If the Texas misread his coordinates because of static, the error could span hundreds of yards. Those 14-inch guns fired shells over 1,000 pounds. A 200-yard mistake would be fatal for the Americans. 7:16 a.m. 2 minutes. The sky, gray and low, didn't care. Then Mac heard it, a new tone in the chaos. A deep, growing thunder from the sea. Not boat engines, something else. The men on the beach stopped shooting and digging. Heads rose. They were listening for the sound the Navy called the thunder of liberation. 7:17 a.m., 1 minute. Mac squinted at Crest N3. Even the Germans had paused, confident in their elevation and concrete bunkers, but not stupid. Then, the sky cracked, not with light, but with sound. First, a distant, high-pitched whistle, -14-inch shells Mach 2 inbound. Then, the roar, overpowering, all-consuming. At exactly 7:18 a.m., the first 1,000-pound shell struck Crest N3. It wasn't an explosion. It was a seismic event. The ground beneath Mac convulsed, throwing sand, rock, and shrapnel 10 meters high. The air pressure slammed into his chest like a fist, knocking the wind out of him. Crest N3, once home to machine gun nests, vanished into a storm cloud of smoke, earth, and shattered concrete. The MG-42 went silent. The USS Texas had found its mark. Shells kept coming. A precise, systematic destruction of every German position on the bluff. Mac's jury-rigged transmission had worked. Infantry, stunned at the silence and the raining concrete, reacted fast. The panic vanished, replaced by a sudden collective fury. Captain Miller shouted over the thunder, "Advance! Go! They're blind! Move!" Men surged forward, crawling, sprinting up the newly exposed dirt ramp. Mac's mission to reestablish communications and trigger naval fire was complete. But battlefields never give clean victories. The Texas had gone radio silent. Mac had burned the only line of communication. What he didn't know, as dust clouded the air, was that the next salvo, though accurate, was drifting. The static he'd ignored had skewed the signal. It was now 7:20 a.m. The next shells from the USS Texas were targeting, unintentionally, the exact area where Captain Miller's troops were now advancing. Mac had saved the invasion. Now he needed another radio to save them from friendly fire. But the only intact set was with the dead Corporal Jenkins to 200 meters back, past the German firing line. The infantry was moving. The advance, suddenly, became a flood of men charging up the slope, using the smoke and chaos left by the 14-inch naval barrage. 7:21 a.m. Mac watched, but the euphoria didn't last. Each salvo from the USS Texas was landing closer to the base of the ramp. Unless the fire was adjusted, it would soon hit their own men. He could see it in his mind, the tactical map, infantry advancing from the 15-meter mark to the 50-meter line. That's exactly where the next shells would land if corrections weren't made. "Captain," Mac shouted to Miller, who was limping but still leading. "Texas is firing blind now. Next round could be short. I need a radio." Miller pointed toward the beach. "Jenkins, his radio might still be intact. He's 50 meters from the water. Go." 50 meters of open sand might as well have been a mile. German fire from side bunkers and mortar teams, positions the Texas hadn't hit yet, was returning. Mac had to choose: crawl slowly and stay alive, but possibly too late, or sprint and accept near-certain death. His training kicked in. Major Davies' first rule echoed in his head. "A wire rat under fire, I send to your rifleman. You're not here to win a gunfight. You're here to get gear where it needs to go." 7:22 a.m., Mac bolted from cover, zigzagging across open beach. He had only his garand, his toolkit, and the burden of knowing if he failed, friendly fire would turn victory into tragedy. Mortar rounds burst 5 meters to his left, sand and smoke shielding him momentarily. He ran over a body, then debris from a wrecked vehicle. 20 meters from his goal, he saw Jenkins, face down, half submerged in the surf. The corporal was dead, but his -300 Seychelles rupees was still strapped to his back, miraculously intact. Jenkins' body had shielded it. 7:23 a.m. Mac dove into the wet sand beside Jenkins, cold water flooding his boots. Gunfire whined past the steel beams around them. He pulled the radio from the pack, soaked, bloodied, but whole. He powered it up. A pale green display flickered on. It worked, but Jenkins had been tuned to Company B's local channel. Mac needed the main naval fire channel, the one he'd just burned with his old radio. Davies had prepared them. During training, he'd forced the wire rats to memorize backup frequency sequences in case encryption gear was lost. Now, under fire, Mac had to recall an 8-digit code from memory to reach the USS Texas. He fumbled with the dial, sweat mixing with seawater and blood. Then a shout from behind. "Short. The next one's short." Mac raised his head. He saw the streak of 2 shells in the sky, on a direct trajectory toward the infantry at the 50-meter line. Miller's position. He pressed the mic button. Static. One last frequency input. 45.320 megahertz. "This is Dog Red 2. Fire short. Fire short. Cease fire immediately. Cease fire on grid 11 to 44A. Our troops are advancing." His voice cut through the chaos and reached the Texas just as the next salvo was about to fire. Through the static, clearer than expected. "Dog Red 2, copy. Confirming. Cease fire. Cease fire. Over." Then Mac heard it, the final incoming whistle. Too late? Captain Miller and his men were within 10 meters of ground zero. Mac dropped to the sand, screaming into the mic, praying that the Texas had paused in time. The 14-inch shell from the USS Texas hit the water, not the sand, not the infantry. The ceasefire order had arrived in time, but just barely. The deviation caused by the earlier static had ironically shifted the salvo seaward, sparing the 116th Regiment troops. USS Texas, USS Texas. 7:24 a.m., Sergeant McCarthy, soaked and shaking, dropped the sand-covered radio and realized the silence that followed wasn't death. It was tactical hesitation. Naval fire had stopped. The Germans on the crest were still dazed. The breach was open. He used Jenkins' radio to send a brief correction to the USS Texas, retargeting their fire deeper into the ridge. With the naval guns redirected and infantry moving forward, the tide at Easy Red began to shift. June 6, 1944, the bloodiest day in American military history, almost became the greatest Allied disaster of World War II. Survival came from courage, resilience, and in crucial moments, the brutal improvisation of men like Thomas McCarthy. Mac, once seen by the Army as a liability for ignoring rules, proved the value of breaking them when everything was on the line. His hacked radio saved the day. His sprint under fire saved the men. His second transmission stopped friendly fire before it turned fatal. He was decorated for his actions at Omaha, but he always credited Major Davies and the Wire Rat's mantra, "If it says broken, fix it. The cost of gear doesn't matter. The cost of failure does." Mac survived Normandy and went on to use his engineering skills through St. Lay and into the Battle of the Bulge, always with his custom toolkit and salvaged parts. He became one of the most valued communications engineers and one of the least conventional. The story of D-Day is told in sweeping headlines: generals, logistics, the industrial might of the Allies. But survival came down to small things: a stolen wire, a 30-second choice, and the nerve of a young sergeant from Boston to defy a broken radio. If this story moved you, don't click away. Hit like, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to know what survival engineering looked like in World War II. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The US, UK, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else. Our community spans the world, and together, we're the memory keepers. Sergeant Thomas Mac McCarthy and the men who stood beside him paid the price in 1944. All we re-ask to do is remember. By watching, liking, and sharing these stories, you help keep their legacy alive. Never forget.